starting a little bit later than the program said. I'd like to welcome our colleagues here sitting with me on the podium. And the theme for this session, the last of the day, is Alliance Building for the Future. And the colleagues who are with us this evening, I'd like to start from my far right, Justice Cameron of the Constitutional Court of South Africa. We'd like to welcome you warmly. And he's Thank you. He's been described as having been an activist for the use of law as a strategy to advance LGBTI equality. We're particularly pleased that you're with us today. We're aware that the court goes into recess sometime this week, and that it'll be in session tomorrow. And we appreciate the time you've given to spend with us today. Karima Brown, sitting next to Justice Cameron, is Group Executive Editor and Chief Content Officer of Independent Media. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. She can also get a round of applause. And Lindiwe Zikali, who's Head of Transformation and Regulatory Affairs at Anglo American. She's an out lesbian. We'd like to welcome her as well. We are expecting Bishop Malusi. That's why there's a vacant chair there. It wasn't for making any particular statement. He's Secretary General of the South Africa Council of Churches. He will be here in about 10 minutes' time, and we're also very grateful that he's been able to spend time with us today. He was excused from attending a week-long meeting for bishops to be with us today, so he is on his way. And he'll probably be sneaked in from that side, and he'll take up his seat. As I said, the theme we're going to be looking at is Alliance Building for the Future. And we'll recall that this morning, when Carla gave us that wonderful overview in terms of strategy and theory of change and how important it is to ensure that it's rooted within our context, she reminded us that the heart of these 3 days is to find shared values. And one way of trying to find shared values is to identify those with whom we can build useful and meaningful alliances. I have a set of 3 questions which I'll be posing to the colleagues here. In terms of timing, for those of you who are always looking at your watches, it is now 4:25, and we're going to be here for an hour and a half. We will share these questions here, and then we'll open up the floor for really as much of an interactive conversation as possible. The first question which I'd like to pose will be to Justice Cameron. What can your sector do to advance the rights and well-being of gender non-conforming people? Do you have thoughts on that?
That's a very frightening question, Alice. But first of all, I want to say what a pleasure it is to be here. And I want to say good afternoon to everyone. How are you, ladies and gentlemen? Have you had a good time so far? It's very nice to be here, and it's wonderful to drive out of the city and to go through heavy traffic and then to arrive on Walter Sisulu Square. And the vista of the square, I've been here many times before, of course, but this afternoon, it just seemed a very appropriate setting for this very, very important and loaded question. And I'm going to talk a bit about the law, but not for long, Alice, because I want to hear what Karima and Lindiwe have to say as well. And I want to congratulate you on also having difficulty with Nguni names. Lindiwe Zikali. You know, with these Tswana speakers don't know the Nguni names.
We try.
You try.
We try. I try to practice before.
So let me talk as little as possible, but I want to pause, ladies and gentlemen, and I want to pause and I want to mention 4 names to you. And then I'm going to mention a 5th. And the 4 names are Sizakele Sigasa and Salome Musua, and they are Stephen Monjeza and Timbalanga Chiwonge. Does anyone know who those 4 names are? Because I'm going to tell you, this isn't a trick question. The 2 names that I mentioned first were 2 women who on a winter's night, not far from here, about 5 kilometers from here, went out together, and they went to a pub. And Sizakele Sigasa was a lesbian activist here in Soweto, and she was with her lover, Salome Musua. And on that icy winter's night, they were murdered. 6 shots into Sizakele's body. Their bodies were found by their families the next morning. And it wasn't the first lesbian murder on our continent, and it won't be the last, but it was the first lesbian murder that stopped us all in our tracks. And it took place on the 7th day of the 7th month of 2007. And I want us to honor and to reverence the memory of those 2 women who had the courage to go to a pub in their own neighborhood in this lovely city of Soweto and to be together. And I want to pay particular honor and tribute to the courage of Sizakele, who was a lesbian activist in this town. And I want to pay particular tribute to her for her race and her class, because our danger, I'm a man in a suit, and I'm not ashamed of being a man. I'm a white man in a suit. I'm proud of my whiteness because my white color is fine. Nothing particularly good about it, nothing particularly bad about it, but it does protect me. And my suit protects me, and the fact that I live in Killarney protects me. Sizakele had none of those protections. That was July 2007. It was a terrible low point for us because it was 13 years after our victory. The victory of democracy and the victory of non-racial ideals, of dignity ideals, and of sexual orientation equality in our country. The other 2 names that I've mentioned were 2 Malawians. December 2009, they announced to the world that they were going to commit themselves in love to each other. One of them, in fact, is a transgender person who now has been given asylum in South Africa, and she lives in Cape Town, in Khayelitsha. But she was identified by everyone and by her community as a man. And the other one, Stephen Monjeza, was a man and died a man. He died a few years later. But they publicly committed themselves to love. They were arrested. They were arraigned before a magistrate. They were given a sentence of how long do you think 2 men in Africa get for declaring that they propose to commit themselves to each other for life? How long? What is the sentence? I'm a judge. What sentence would you give, ladies and gentlemen? Life? You tough judge. You said life. They got 14 years, the maximum under the Malawi Penal Code. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to wrap up, and I want to make just a few points. The one is that the law is a good place to start. I went to Malawi 2 years ago, 2 years and 2 months ago. I gave a speech at a state dinner where President Banda was, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs in her government said to me over dinner before my speech, "You went about it the wrong way. You should have waited. You should have come with the law at the end. You've got to change attitudes first." What he doesn't realize is that the law, and this is an answer to your question, Alice, the law is a way of changing attitudes, and that at least we in South Africa got right, but we haven't got enough right. And Salome and Sizakele remind us of how little we've got right. Across race, across class, across gender, across sexual orientation. We've got a long way to go. The law helps us, but we need activists like you. We need activists from all sectors, and we need our basic common humanity. The second point I want to make is that Stephen Monjeza and Tiwonga Chimbalanga showed us that we will never shut up in Africa again. Never, ever, ever. You cannot put us back into the bottle. We are out. There are out people all across Africa. There is a gay and lesbian pride parade in Uganda, despite the murders and the killings and the threats and the violence and the terror. And that's our future in Africa, and the law will help us there. Lawyers have a part to play, but I've always believed, I started my life in activist law 35 years ago, I've always believed that law has a subordinate role to civil society activism, and that's still the case. What we have to do is to change attitudes in every one of your sectors, the churches, trade unions, corporate world. We've got to do all of those things, and the law will help us. And the third point I want to make is a point about our constitutional ideals. in South Africa. We promised each other. How many of you are fellow South Africans with me? No one. Put up your hands, I want to see you. Don't be shy. So we're a minority of South Africans, a majority of non-South Africans, including you, Alice. You can't deny it. We made a promise to each other. We promised that we would create a society in which we would have human dignity for all, in which there would be equality, in which there would be opportunity, in which there would be justice on the grounds of sexual orientation and gender. The law can help also with that, but to attain that under the law, we have to start with our humanity. We have to start with our humanity as Africans, as people, as South Africans, black and white, gay and straight, male and female, rich and poor, empowered, disempowered. We have to start with that humanity, and if we start there, we will do everything right. Thank you very much.
Just a quick follow-up question. What about countries where constitutional protection does not exist?
That's where you've got to start. You've got to fight for constitutional change. It's happening in the West Indies. Incredibly brave activists in the West Indies who deal with comparable hostility and hatred as exists in Nigeria, as exists in Uganda, exists in Malawi and other countries. They've taken J-Flag. Morris Tomlinson has taken the case to the Court of Appeal of the Caribbean. So I see it, Alice, as a partnered struggle. But for me, the key, why I mentioned Sizakele and Salome and Tiwonga and Stephen, is the visibility issue. That you've got to create conditions in your sectors in which LGBTI people, in which gender differentiated people are free to come out, can identify themselves, because every one of our families has got a gay or lesbian person. We just don't know it. 1 in 10 people is either exclusively gay or lesbian, or is transgendered, or is bisexual, or has some measure of same-sex sexual orientation. We just have to create the circumstances. So the answer to your question is that we've got to fight from two grounds. And I think visibility is the most important. The point that the Malawian Minister of Foreign Affairs made, which is right, is that you've got to start with the community as well. I didn't accept him to tell me that we should have left the law to one side, because the law helps with the community, but you've got to start with visibility in the community, and that's where those 4 heroes have made such a difference.
Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you so much for inviting me here. Obviously, in the context of media, we have the battle for ideas. Ours is not a uniform industry. There's certainly a massive contested space in which narratives are being told, the production of news, what is news, all of that is about a series of choices we make every single day. And those who believe that, or rather let me say, I'm of the view that those who believe that news is valueless live in La La Land, really. There's a couple of things that we can do in this contestation.